Starting RTX 20 series GPUs from nvidia, besides the ray tracing DLSS feature was presented. AI upscaling that increased your FPS without seriously damaging image quality. The technology evolved, and starting RTX 40 series we had frame generation, and now RTX 50 series we have multi-frame generation. Sounds good on paper, but why is it bad for modern gaming industry, and why DLSS is killing games right now, and is it killing games right now? So right now on the screen you can see one of the best games of 2025, which I really hope will get Game of the Year award. And I was incredibly lucky that in order to get 60 FPS in this game I didn't need to turn FSR or DLSS on. DLSS is one of the most well-known gaming technologies right now. You may not know what CUDA cores are, what ACE for NPCs is, and why DirectX 12 is better than DirectX 11, and that's okay, since gamers shouldn't dive deep into technical aspects of gaming development to enjoy gaming itself. But about DLSS or FSR have heard almost everyone, since almost every first game after release has this option on in graphical settings. So what's up gamers, I'm sure you get some idea how some of these technologies like DLSS, FSR or Sony's PSSR and other upscalers work. It takes image quality in lower resolution like 1080p and then using some sort of algorithm adds fragments to match your monitor or TV resolution or like 1440p or 4K. And due to native resolution being lower, GPU needs less power, so you're getting better FPS since the resources are free. Yeah, you'll get a bit worse picture than it would be native resolution, but you are getting much better FPS. But the question is, if upscaling is such a great technology to improve FPS, why we have almost never heard about it until 2016 till 2018. There were upscalers in games from PS3 era, like Uncharted 2 or Gears of War, or wasn't there? So today I'll tell you about the evolution of upscaling and which technologies nvidia is hiding behind the DLSS letters and how gaming industry didn't get the real purpose of these technologies. So ever since 3 to 2 aspect ratio of screens, computer clubs and CS 1.4 or 1.6, gamers understood that if you would change resolution to 800 to 600, FPS will improve. But the problem was that if for the same FPS like first-person shooters, decreased graphics was not the problem since the main goal of the game was to win the team sitting next to you during the LAN party, gamers who preferred single-player games would like to enjoy these so-called graphics. So the technology behind upscaling back then was a simple method of interpolation when the pixel next to the original got assigned the same color without counting any median value or anti-aliasing. So something similar you could get when upscaling, so-called upscaling images from Paint in Windows XP, but since then of course Paint got improved algorithms for upscaling like bilinear interpolation, but never mind, back to the gaming. So years passed and only at the time of release PS4 talks about upscaling returned to mass audience. So the reason behind this announcement of 4K experience from Sony. But about native 4K there was not even a thought, since even nowadays native 4K in modern games can provide something like 4 GPUs on the market. So to show us the upscaling possibilities, Horizon Zero Dawn game was used, which was upscaling to 4K using chess rendering method, and during the era of PS4 and Xbox One X, these things were quite popular. So as you could have guessed, chess method is being called chess not randomly. As all of you know, every image is being shown using lots of small square pixels. So what if we have divided all of these pixels in a chessboard pattern by black and white respectively? So chess rendering is when game driver is fully rendering, let's say, only black boxes on the board, while white boxes are being calculated based on surrounding them black boxes. So in reality, game's driver needs to calculate only half of the pixels on the screen, so in terms of performance this method is really great. That means that if we are talking about 4K, instead of rendering 8,300,000 pixels for GPU using this method will be enough to render only 4,150,000 pixels, and to reconstruct the rest pretty quickly. So the reconstruction method depends on the game. Some games are using average color by diagonals of surrounding pixels like 1/8 of red, 1/16 of red, and so on. Some games are having zones with core pixels as they take as basis and start reconstruction from there. But this type of chess upscaling has obvious downsides. Upscaled picture looks very blurry during any type of movement, it begins to flicker, and on thin parts of the image noises can be noticeable. In other words, frames are looking noisy and not very stable. That's why pure chess rendering can be rarely met except early projects for PS4 and Xbox One X, like Call of Duty, Infinite Warfare, Watch Dogs 2 or Battlefield 1. But even in these projects, some sort of anti-aliasing was used to mask different type of visual artifacts. So we get right now, the upscaling mission is to finalize the frame, so there would be minimal difference comparing with the frame in native resolution. But in order to finalize the frame, you need to get basis somewhere, and the more information you have, better result you'll receive. So some smart programmers decided, why are we taking only current frame and adding to it when we can take nearby frames, already past frames, since the difference between them is not so great. Something may happen, but mostly the frame is similar. 33 milliseconds for 30 FPS and 17 milliseconds for 60 FPS. Not so much time for the frame to change generally. The main mission is to understand where to is the objects moving. So in order picture not to look as soapy, which was the situation with the chessboard pattern, developers created Temporal Anti-Aliasing Upscaling or TAAU. Temporal upscaling method is being created in approximately 2017, and it doesn't matter which game you choose, most probably TAAU will be one of the options for upscaling. Stalker 2, Rainbow Six Siege, Starfield, every AAA game has this option up to nowadays. So in order for TAAU to upscale the frame decently, it needs to take information not only from the current frame, but from previous frames as well, and computing in which direction objects and parts of the picture are moving, creating so-called vectors of movement. And then it uses filtered data to recreate missing pixels. So, by having information in which direction the picture is moving, we are getting much more pleasant picture altogether, comparing to usual chessboard type of upscaling. Well-known downsides here, because of movement of the camera, objects may have some sort of aura around them while moving, so-called ghosting effect. It happens when algorithm doesn't calculate correctly where specific pixel is going to, for example during fast camera rotation or if the scene changes drastically in a moment. Obviously, the upscaled frame will look much more soapy than the native one, so usually developers are adding sharpening filters. Of course, by turning on hardcore upscaling, some minor details might disappear or flood in together, but right now we have much better methods of upscaling like the DLSS'es, but temporal upscaling still is its basis and their core, so that's the reason of its presence in every modern AAA game. So 2018 changed everything since nvidia showed us DLSS, entering the era of advanced upscaling. At first, DLSS was presented as a way to compensate performance drops from turning on RTX or ray tracing, as for example was in a demo of Battlefield 5 with fire reflecting from a car, decreasing FPS to a stable 30. So, first games supporting latest upscaler from nvidia were Battlefield 5, Metro Exodus and Control. DLSS 1.0 improved performance up to 25 to 30%, but the question is in the quality of its work. And it was not so great at least. The main idea behind DLSS 1.0 was neural network, which was fed the same frames in lowest and highest resolution so it could find out how to improve the picture by looking for similar things in both of them. It should have worked great on paper, but in reality DLSS 1.1 ignored achievements of temporal upscaling by computing every frame separately, so it looked pretty bad. Moreover, this neural network should be learned on how to work in each game separately, which made integration harder and quality in each game was very different, but summarizing everything about DLSS 1.0, it was not so great. DLSS 1.0 couldn't adapt to active frame change, with creating ghosting, flickering and soapy image. For the latest feature I named right now, first version of nvidia Smart Upscaler got its new name of Deep Learning Super Soaping. But that was only then. In 2020, DLSS 2.0 was presented, and this technology was really game changer for upscaling. If the first version, as told before, was getting information only from the current frame, 2.0 got information from current and past frames, including movement vectors. In simpler terms, temporal upscaling was mated with neural network. Even more, starting with DLSS 2.0, there was no need to feed the game to NVIDIA supercomputer in order to get decent DLSS results, since neural network got unified, and that meant better and faster integration, and even more, quality of image increased drastically. Even some people started talking that in 4K and DLSS on quality mode there was nearly impossible to differentiate native and upscaled image, especially in static images. And because of how easy it became to integrate NVIDIA Wonder into their project, DLSS integration started to appear in most of the projects, and the most famous example of the year 2020 was my favorite, Cyberpunk 2077. Since technically the game was awful after the release, DLSS was the only thing that saved your FPS on PC unless you had RTX 2080 Ti and top-of-the-line other components. But that was really a bad find for the industry. So after some time, third version of DLSS appeared. Algorithms of movement prediction became even more precise because of what there were even less artifacts. But what's more important, that was the moment when DLSS frame generation appeared in latest GPUs from NVIDIA. Frame generation technical aspect is relatively simple to understand. Your GPU doesn't send the frame to the monitor as soon as it was rendered. It happens with 2 to 3 frames latency, which can be edited in NVIDIA control panel by the way. So the idea behind the frame generation is that during this micro latency, frame generator compares difference between 2 already rendered frames and adds third image generated by AI. And this third frame adds to the feeling of the game while impacting your GPU not so much, since this type of computing is done on separate core, not involved in native frame rendering. The problem here is that this process of frame generation doesn't involve game engine, so it doesn't add to the responsiveness of the game, since everything is happening on GPU only, leaving game engine aside. So DLSS 3.0 includes 3 major technologies in itself. DLSS Super Resolution Upscaler, which adds to performance by reconstructing the frame from lesser resolution, AI Frame Generation, which doesn't add to the performance but adds additional frame to everything generated, making picture more pleasant to the eye, and DLAA, technology we haven't talked before but which we are going to talk about right now. So DLAA, our deep learning anti-aliasing, which essentially removes so-called stairs, artifacts, noises, and so on. It's not perfect, but still much better than other anti-aliasing technologies, so that's what I choose for playing with in most AAA games, including Kingdom Come Deliverance. Why are these 3 technologies under one name of DLSS? I think that's pure marketing, since everything is based on artificial intelligence and tensor cores, which are being advertised as something competitors doesn't have in a way NVIDIA has. So I think the only reason is marketing under the one DLSS trademark. So a regular person doesn't need to remember several names and acronyms, just DLSS. DLSS is good, DLSS is something NVIDIA only has. So that's all you need to know. DLSS is working better and better with each version, but it is pretty demanding towards hardware. So NVIDIA GPUs with Tensor cores, so only RTX 20 series or newer for DLSS to work, and also depends on series. For some frame generation won't work at the same RTX 20 series or 30 series. Well, now I think I really need to mention competitor for DLSS from AMD called FSR. FSR all in all does all the same, but without AI and tensor cores needed, so there is no need for specific GPU series as well. But totally FSR is a great temporal upscaling algorithm with impressive filters for post-processing. It doesn't give one-to-one same results as well-trained neural network, but starting FSR2 or even 3, it is the thing which can be used pretty good, and that is the thing that saves the Steam Deck system on Crystal, in which doesn't have tensor cores during demanding games, by giving it both upscaling and frame generation. Looks not so good in some games like Baldur's Gate, but it is really playable if you get used to it. But where is the problem with DLSS, FSR, or god forbid XeSS from Intel? Data. More data you'll provide, better results you'll get, and here nothing can really compete with highly trained neural network like NVIDIA has. The problem is with raw data. Let's compare different native resolutions with the same DLSS upscaling preset of DLSS quality. It renders image using 66% of native resolution, so if you have 4K screen, 66% is 1440p or Quad HD, which is a pretty good native result. So you are winning in performance without a lot of suffering in picture quality. But let's imagine that you do not have Elon Musk as your relative and your screen is 1440p natively, 66% of which will be 1715 to 964 pixels, like non-standard resolution, which is even worse than Full HD, although sometimes picture for Quad HD is upscaling from Full HD, which fully depends on the specific game. But that's not the problem I'm talking about. Comparing upscaling for 4K and for 1440p, for 1440p upscaler will have less data to work with, which will make it work harder, so the final result will be worse, since there is less native pixels to work with. And now, if you are a normal guy who didn't upgrade his monitor for a long time, DLSS quality for 1080p screen natively will be 720p, just like native Steam Deck screen or resolution for games from PS3 era. In that case, DLSS is trying to restore the picture close from to nothing information, so the result is not impressive at least. So the greater resolution we are upscaling from, the better result we'll get. DLSS shows great results in 4K, decent results in Quad HD, but using it in 1080p on modern hardware is somewhat of modern type of masochism. The technology isn't meant for Full HD at all. So if in order to get playable frame rate in Full HD on GPU similar or better of RTX 3060, you need to turn DLSS on, there are two options. Either the game provides you with photorealistic picture, or, what's more probable, someone was creating the game using ass instead of hands, and now is hiding his so-called skill in optimization behind DLSS. Ironically, with frame generation situation is the same. It needs data, more the better. Less time there will be between real frames, better quality of generated frames you'll get. Ideal scenario is when the game provides you with real 40 to 60 FPS, which then are multiplied by frame generator up to 80 FPS. In these games, game control is responsive as it is, and the game's logic is being calculated fast and in time, and frame generator just adds to smoothness. but creating from 25 frames to 50 is a pretty bad idea since control will still be very slow and unresponsive, even though frame rate is pretty decent, but only on paper. So as you could have imagined, upscaling before PS4 or Xbox One X series consoles existed. Upscaling from 720p to 1080p was in nearly every single game for PS3 or Xbox 360. The chosen resolution was the most popular resolution for TVs back in the day, but the quality of upscaling was still pretty bad, so there was nothing to brag about. They were using bilinear interpolation, but in order not to dive into mathematics for an hour, here is some readable information if you really wish so. All you need to know that upscaling was pretty bad and still looked like 720p even after upscaling. Starting middle of 2010s, talks about upscaling became louder for two reasons. Starting approximately 2016, standard for TV resolution started to go towards 4K, so there was necessity to sell 4K hardware and 4K content. But obviously there was not enough raw power for native 4K rendering, so companies needed to sell at least their interpretation of 4K, just to have 4K on the box and in presentation somewhere. And second reason is that was the time when decent ways of image restoring and upscaling appeared, which may become selling point, just like right now PS5 Pro is bragging about their own PSSR. But is it the fact that because of different type of upscalers and frame generation drivers being popularized, developers are not trying as hard in optimizations than they should? Thinking DLSS or FSR for the matter will do hard work for them. Remember Last of Us Part 1 port to PC? It required 16 GB of VRAM on release, and one of the options to pass by this ridiculous limitation was by using DLSS. Go Next, developers of Remnant 2 stated that they were creating the game keeping upscaling in mind. In other words, they didn't try hard with optimization, and Upscaler was set up to pretty hardcore settings by default. So if you were running the game on 1080p, the upscaling resolution was great 540p. Should I say that the game was looking like a big pile of shit? I think you guessed it before I said it. The same Stalker 2, which was released not so long ago, had such poor optimization that you need to turn DLSS and in some cases frame generation on just to return normal performance. So the technology which was developed to adjust picture for high-resolution screens even on average hardware, or to adjust frame rate for monitors which allowed that, or even to compensate for loss in performance from using photorealistic technologies for image improvement like ray tracing or path tracing, became a thing you turn on just to get normal performance on an average screen. Not for realistic amazing graphics and highest refresh rate in highest resolution, but just for the game to be playable, at least somehow. DLSS and FSR themselves are great technologies. They can give you amazing picture even if you do not have latest and greatest hardware. So they can give you extra few FPS if you are playing using, let's say, 144Hz screen, or if developers didn't give enough fuck for optimization. At least Upscaler can prolong life of an old GPU like, let's say, the same RTX 2060. In most cases, these technologies allow most players to play these under-optimized raw games, which would be unplayable otherwise. But nvidia has never before advertised DLSS as alternative to game optimization, but just existing of such technologies allows some developers to lay down with hardcore optimization, since they know that Upscaler will add something around 20 to 25% of performance, so their game will still be somehow playable. So DLSS and FSR itself do not kill games. It just allows some developers to underdeliver, since they are putting their faith in upscalers and frame generation engines. And main argument of if such great upscalers didn't exist, developers couldn't deliver such poor optimized games goes to hell by looking at the games which had awful optimization on release date even before DLSS became a thing, like the same Assassin's Creed Unity, Batman Arkham Knight, or console version of Just Cause 3. These AAA games were buggy, had stutters and FPS drops even before it became mainstream thing to do and even before smart upscalers became a thing. Shitty optimized games with 2 to 3 months of optimization sent to recycling are releasing by companies which are just abusing presence of these technologies. Solution here, not pre-ordering games just after a few trailers, since corporations, after seeing numbers of pre-orders by the latest price of $80 to $100 per piece, are just thinking that releasing raw under-optimized product, but in time, is better than postponing it to optimize it in a way it should be optimized. Now, presence of games that require you to have high-end hardware to have at least 45 to 60 FPS and still require upscaler make your value optimized games more. For the same kingdom come Deliverance 2, which works great even on average hardware and looks amazing at the same time. The game stands out by the fact that on GTX 1060 it can still give you 60 FPS comparing to majority of modern day AAA bullshit. It stands out by the fact that developers worked on it and released the product with no 2.0 version needed for product to be ready for normal gaming. So I really hope that optimization will be one of the key factors for games to become financially successful in near future, and so the words at nvidia RTX 50th series presentation DLSS is a way to play would be just a marketing tool and not a harsh reality.